It began quietly, too quietly. No press release, no explanation. Just a single internal memo and the words, "Case closed." The investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's remaining network, the powerful names, the missing money, the sealed files was suddenly over, and at the center of that silence stood Donald Trump's Department of Justice. When news leaked that the probe into Epstein's co-conspirators had been shut down without warning, Washington froze. Even members of Congress who had stayed silent before were asking one question: why now? But as the details emerged, it became clear. This wasn't just a bureaucratic decision. It was a calculated move, one that could shield some of the most powerful people in the country, and that's when the real storm began. In the months following Epstein's death, federal prosecutors in New York had promised the public something rare: accountability. They vowed to chase every remaining lead to uncover the full network that enabled years of abuse. Victims had stepped forward. Lawmakers were demanding answers. But when Trump's DOJ took control of the files, everything changed. Requests for updates went unanswered. Investigators were reassigned. Then, late one Friday evening, the entire case was quietly closed. Inside Capitol Hill, Representative Jamie Raskin fired the first shot, sending letters to the DOJ and FBI demanding every document they had buried. He warned that the American people had a right to know who benefited from shutting this down. And behind closed doors, whispers began spreading. Was this about protecting individuals or protecting reputations tied too close to power? The answer, some believed, was about to surface. By early reports, over 1,000 victims and $1.5 billion in suspicious transactions were tied to the case. The scope was massive, spanning banks, offshore accounts, and political figures on both sides of the aisle. But the DOJ's abrupt closure left one glaring message: someone wanted this trail to go cold. Speaker Mike Johnson, meanwhile, faced questions of his own. Why was he delaying key votes tied to the release of Epstein-related files? Why were certain hearings suddenly postponed with no new dates announced? Raskin's letters described the move as a betrayal of justice. Even moderate Republicans privately admitted the optics were disastrous. Yet through all the outrage, Trump's allies remained defiant. They called the investigation redundant. They said nothing new would have been found. But if that were true, why the secrecy? Why did every path toward transparency seem to lead to a dead end? Something or someone was being protected. Then came the breaking point: an internal document surfaced from within the Southern District of New York, showing that prosecutors had been actively pursuing new leads just weeks before the case was killed. Witness interviews were ongoing. Financial subpoenas were being processed, and then it all stopped. Overnight. When reporters asked the DOJ for comment, they issued a short statement: no further public information will be provided. For many Americans, that phrase sounded like the final nail in the coffin of accountability. For others, it was proof that something deeper was unfolding. Even international figures, including those linked to Epstein's private circle, began distancing themselves publicly. The pressure on Washington was mounting, and still, no one from Trump's team offered a direct answer, until one name surfaced in the documents, a name that reignited the fire. That name was Virginia Giuffre, the survivor whose testimony helped expose the Epstein operation years earlier. In her newly released memoir, she described how prosecutors had pleaded with victims to stay patient, promising that justice was still coming. Now, reading those words alongside the DOJ's silence, it felt like a cruel betrayal. Lawmakers called emergency hearings. Victims demanded that Congress reopen the files independently. And in that moment, the question echoed across newsrooms, online forums, and late-night shows alike: did Trump's DOJ bury a case to protect the powerful? As tension reached its peak, one exchange from a prior oversight hearing resurfaced between Representative Pramila Jayapal and Trump's former aide, Kash Patel. When asked if he believed the victims were credible, Patel dodged, stumbled, and pointed fingers. That clip went viral not because of what he said, but because of what he refused to say. And by then, It was clear. Silence wasn't just avoidance, it was complicity. In the weeks that followed, Washington tried to move on, but the Epstein case had become something bigger, a symbol of how power protects itself when the lights go out. Raskin's committee continued pressing for the release of the full records. Families of victims held vigils outside the Capitol, and through it all, the same haunting question remained. What happens when justice is no longer blind but selective? For now, the Epstein files remain sealed. The DOJ stands by its decision, and the American people are left staring at a locked door, wondering what truths still lie behind it. Because sometimes it's not the noise that exposes corruption, it's the silence that follows.